Ever since the creation of the world, God's power and nature, even though we can't see them physically, have been understood and seen through the things God has made. So nature tells us about God, right? There's the line I used a couple weeks ago, is that there's 2 books of Revelation. Does anybody remember what the 2 books are? One of them is the easy Sunday school answer. The Bible. Jesus. I heard of Jesus. I approve, Katie. One of the books of Revelation, historically, is the Bible. The other is nature, right? God's Word and God's world. You can study Scripture to learn about God. You can study nature to learn about God, is what Romans 1 is saying. So we should cherish the earth. And like we talked about earlier in Genesis 1, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." And you would be amazed at just how many pages have been written over the Hebrew word dominion and what that means for how we should relate to the earth. And some people take it to be, I'm in charge, the world is just here to serve me, and I'm the absolute monarch. And some people say it means that we should be servant leaders of the earth, and we should care for the earth. And I think if you look at the Old Testament, the kings who treat the world this way are seen as the bad kings. And the kings who treat the world this way, as they should be servants of the world, are the good kings. The biblical notion of dominion doesn't mean destruction. You hear some people talk about how there's all these natural resources here, and it's our duty to use them up because God gave them to us, so we should cut down all the trees and use them for fuel. And I just don't think that's a biblical notion of dominion and what God has given us. Any questions about the for God section?
Well, I have a question about the dominion.
Yeah.
He might be able to contribute, but are there other translations of the word that has been translated as dominion?
Yeah, good question. Stewardship is a word that people use sometimes. Stewardship, yeah. I like that one because a steward is someone who is in charge in the place of someone else, right? So my generation always thinks of stewards like the Lord of the Rings or whatever. There's like the steward of a region is in charge while the king is away, right? And I think that's a really good image for us to have in mind. Dominion, stewardship, I think stewardship gets at the idea as well, is that we're in charge of this as the dominant species on earth, but we're not the absolute authority overall. God's the absolute authority overall.
Well, it seems like steward actually takes away the argument that verse means that man can do whatever man wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can take the oil because I have...
Yeah, absolutely it does. Good thought. Anybody else? Any other questions about this? Okay. The other reason I think we should really care about climate change is for humanity. We talked last week actually about the United Methodist principles in the social doctrine about creation care. I'm not going to reread the entire paragraph, but I think there's a very real issue here about justice, that the people who caused climate change, we talked last week about carbon emissions, are mostly wealthy Western countries. China and India are catching up now, and they're catching up in a hurry, but the bulk of the problem is because Western economies have been so carbon intensive for the last 100 years. But Western economies aren't the ones who are going to hurt the worst and the first on this issue, right? Like, you will feel the effects of climate change in America. You are currently feeling the effects of climate change in America. Like, I saw an armadillo in Nashville a little while ago. That doesn't happen, right? So in small ways, we can see it here already. Asthma rates are increasing. Pollen count is increasing. If you live in the Midwest, it's flooding a lot right now. If you live in California, wildfire rates and volumes are crazy right now. If you live near the coast, if you live in Houston, if you live in Puerto Rico, you're already feeling the effects of these issues. But in America, we can largely adapt to these problems. But if you live somewhere else, if you live somewhere that doesn't have our infrastructure, you're going to have a really hard time adapting to climate change. I was reading the other day about this small Pacific island called Kiribati, and they're having to decide whether or not to move their entire country, several thousand of them, and buy land in New Zealand because their entire island is going to be underwater over the next couple decades, right? So if you live in Miami, flooding's a problem, but you can sell your house and move inland and you're going to be okay. If you live in Kiribati, you can't just move inland because you're an island, right? Yeah, absolutely. There are so many island countries where this is a problem. And we don't have to look that far from our own backyard. If you look at Puerto Rico got crushed by Hurricane Maria, and flooding rates are worse because ocean levels are rising, right? My wife's from Virginia Beach. And Virginia Beach is historically a very conservative area because there's a large military presence there. But because we've had like 8 inches of sea level rise in the last 100 years, their high tides and their flood rates are getting worse and worse. And they have to reevaluate their flood insurance policy because the flood insurance policies, there's so much flooding that the programs are going bankrupt, right? So you have areas where people who don't even really believe in climate change are having to adjust their local policy because flood rates are increasing and increasing and increasing, right? So we get this issue in America, but the people who are going to be hurt worst are the people who don't have the resources to recover, right? I think there's a really clear challenge in Scripture to care for people who don't have resources. My favorite, you would probably guess, Matthew 25. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me. I think it's hard to find a least of these who are lower than the people who are getting hurt by climate change right now and in the near future. Any questions about humanitarian issues and climate change? Yeah.
It's something I heard recently. It was at the Methodist Climate Change Summit.
Excellent.
The idea of the love our neighbors is
Yes.
part of that. The idea of our future neighbors in time.
Yes.
What we're doing with the climate change is going to have a terrible impact on people in the future.
Mm-hmm.
They're our neighbors too, even if they're not born yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea, is that your neighbors aren't just people who are around you physically, but who are around you in time. So the people all over the world and the people who will live all over the world in the future. And playing climate change forward for future generations to deal with is not a way of loving our neighbors in the future. Absolutely. Thanks. Okay. So I want to take the lion's share of today and have some discussion times about solutions. So we're going to talk in small groups. And last week I gave people homework. Does anybody remember what the homework was last week? This is a quiz. Katie, what was homework for last week? Oh, okay. Seminary student, can't pay attention in Sunday school class. Yeah. Homework last week was think about solutions at West End Methodist. Okay? Now, like you mentioned, driving less, and
driving does.
yeah, absolutely, and
So I won't be hit by any more cars.
absolutely, and I really do think individual actions matter. So some people say that individual actions are kind of useless and fruitless in the world we live in today, and I don't think that's true on climate change. I think individual actions really do matter, and you can make an individual difference by driving less, and especially flying less, using less electricity, and eating less red meat. You can make a difference in those ways. But climate change is a society-wide problem, so we need society-wide solutions. And for everybody here, a church is like a really good in-between level, or it's small enough that you can still really make a difference. Like it's hard for individuals to make laws pass in Congress. But individuals in a church can make a difference very much more easily. So climate change is a society issue, so we're going to take a few minutes and talk about ways that West End Methodist is doing a good job on climate change, is doing not such a good job on climate change, and talk about the solutions in a second. So first off, let's talk at our tables about how you think West End Methodist can reduce the amount of things they throw away. All right. Let's bring them back together. Let's bring it back together. Okay, we'll go round table style and get some ideas up here on the board. So I'm going to go around the tables, and you're going to give me one idea you had for either of these two prompts. How to reduce the stuff you waste and throw away, and how to reduce the energy and resources you use on the front end. So it's kind of a two-part. It's on the front end, where are we getting our stuff to consume? How do we reduce the amount of stuff we need? On the back end, how do we reduce the amount of stuff we then throw away? All right, table one, what you got?
More vigorous recycling.
Recycling. Does West End recycle? Kind of. Because I've been looking around. I haven't seen any.
Cardboard from the offices, I think.
Cardboard in the office. Okay, good. Any recycling's better than none.
Upstairs by the drink machine, there's a bottle, can recycle.
So we take cans and bottles in some places and cardboard from the office. Okay, so what's a way we could expand our recycling initiatives? There's one super easy one I tell churches to do. What's the other thing you recycle besides cardboard? Paper for bulletins, yes. I think you have a putback box to recycle them or to use them for the 11 o'clock? Okay, fair enough. For recycling, great. I feel like a lot of churches, paper recycling from the office and your bulletins, it's like, well, you all have a kitchen, so it's different. But for a lot of churches, that's like half of their waste right there, is just paper from the office. So recycling, expansion, good. Let's go to the next table. What do y'all, oh, yes, ma'am?
One thing that just hit me, we don't compost here. We did it one time, but there's so many apartments around here.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we could do a ministry of a compost corner
Absolutely.
and put real clear instructions about how to stuff.
Yeah. Nashville now, you can do Compost Nashville. It's pretty cheap. You can get like a big 50-gallon trash can for $20 a month or something. They'll come by once a month and pick it up. And for most churches, that's plenty. That's what I do. I used to take my compost to the recycling center out Donaldson near the airport, which is like a 20-minute drive from my house. But now, Second Presbyterian Church just started a compost corner, so I only drive 2 minutes down to Second Pres and dump it in there. So I would absolutely support a compost corner. Second Presbyterian does composting. Yeah, Katie?
I was just saying, as a student who lives in an apartment and wishes we could compost, but we don't have the means to, would fully support that.
Yeah. I think you get a lot of walking traffic from people from all these apartments around us would be glad to do that. So you get a little star for compost corner idea. Good job. Next table, what we got?
We will talk about light fixtures and solar panels. And
Yep.
Like,
We'll go one thing at a time. Light fixtures. Are these lights always on? Do they turn off? Do all the lights in the building turn off?
some of them are on automatic settings.
A lot of them are on
Motion sensor is great because like a big building, you want to have lights on whenever people are here, but you don't want to leave lights on at 4 a.m. when no one's here. So light sensors is a good idea. Another thing I've seen is people put little signs on their light switches, which are shown to remind people to turn them off when they leave the room. Put light fixtures. Were you thinking anything else, Patrick, on light fixtures?
LED light fixtures.
Yeah, LED, absolutely. There's a great museum demonstration. Science communication guy, I'm a sucker for good museum activities. And you have a crank, right, that you can turn to generate electricity, and they have an old-fashioned light bulb, like an incandescent bulb. Then they have a compact fluorescent bulb, and they have an LED bulb. And so you send the kid up to the old style, and it just barely flickers. And then he cranks the compact fluorescent bulb, and it lights up. Then he cranks the LED bulb, and it glows. So it shows you how much more efficient they are with the energy you give them. So light fixtures is great. Big fan. Next table in the back. Table Katie.
We talked about how on Sunday morning a lot of people drink coffee out of the styrofoam cup.
Yes.
Getting rid of the styrofoam. I can't say this because I don't want to be in charge of this, but
Yep. Yeah. Careful. Careful, we'll put you in charge of it.
I'm trying to watch myself. But either switching to paper cups or just having like old mugs available for people to use for their coffee. I'm not sure how that would work.
Absolutely.
I really thought we'd done away with our styrofoam cups that we're using for If there are styrofoam, tell me where they are.
All right. Real quick, I always point this out. Who knows what styrofoam is made of?
Polystyrene.
No. Styrofoam is made of sin. Sin and apathy. That's what styrofoam is made of. Wrong. Okay? Styrofoam. All right. If you grow up and become president and become hands down the greatest president in history, right? Your styrofoam will still outlive all of your accomplishments, right? The earliest person we know was this pharaoh in 3000 BC, and if he got Chinese takeout in styrofoam, it would still be around, okay? All right. So styrofoam is made of sin and apathy, and you should not use styrofoam. Thank you. I'm glad we clarified that. There actually is. It's significantly more technically difficult, so it's a little more. It's more expensive. But some of the really progressive cities on environmental issues can recycle styrofoam, and the process is really cool. I would encourage you to look up a video on YouTube of how they do it because it's fascinating. They use a liquid to dissolve the styrofoam, which then filters through all the other trash and then solidifies at the bottom. So it's really cool how they do it. But Nashville can't recycle styrofoam.
There is a company that will take it, but it's out, way out Nashville Road.
Fair enough. What were you going to say?
Yeah, that company is inconvenient to drive to that takes the big block styrofoam.
Yeah.
Public stores, and maybe other grocery stores, I don't know, but I know Publix does, takes the flat styrofoam, the kind that you buy chicken and hamburger meat in, and
Okay.
egg cartons. And,
Okay. I didn't know that. Great. But let's talk about coffee cups for a minute, because that's not a pet peeve of mine, but that's an example. In almost every church in the country has coffee on Sunday mornings, and they use some sort of disposable and throw it away. Because if you get paper cups that are truly recyclable, that don't have the little waxy film on the inside, then your hands get burned, right? So you end up using a skinny paper cup and like a cardboard sleeve, but the paper cup isn't waterproof enough to hold your coffee without falling apart a little bit over the course of the morning, right? I would say for a church at this size, and it's my last week, so I can just kind of say what I'm thinking. Bring me back, please. But a church of this size, you have an industrial grade washing room right in the basement. I would say if you bought 50, 100 coffee mugs, yes, you might lose a couple. That's how it works. But I think you would pay for yourself sooner than later for how much bulk stuff you're going through every week on coffee mugs. And two, you would reduce both the amount of stuff you're putting in a landfill and the stuff you're having people use resources to produce and ship to you. So things like that are like a really easy step you can take to reduce stuff on both ends. Okay.
Well, there was a thing like we did at school where you just told people to bring one from home.
Absolutely.
Bring your own mug with you.
Absolutely.
You can clean it.
Absolutely. It's coffee. Most of the time, like for me, I bring a coffee cup somewhere, drink coffee, and then just rinse it out, and it's fine. You can wash it at home if you need to. Rinse. Yeah, that's true. That is true. That was a gender-based assumption, and I apologize. Yeah.
We're talking about how Sunday school, there's a lot of crafts
Yep.
going on, and a lot of times, like for me, I'm just going to be honest, it's like, oh wow, that's great, and then it goes into recycling, and before it goes into garbage,
Yeah.
it's just a lot of
Oh. They're in the scrapbook. It's okay.
I have them actually saved in a special box under my bed.
Yeah. I would say when you talk about recycling paper, the way to make people recycle is to make it obvious and easy, right? If people have to come down to the basement back closet to recycle their bulletins, no one's going to do it. If you put recycling bins in high traffic areas when people are already holding paper, like by the exits at the sanctuary, and in the office beside the shredder and the copier, and outside Sunday school classrooms, or when you're walking on the way out for all the paper crafts, absolutely. There's one other thing I think this church can switch to hard copies of instead of disposables. Does anybody know what I might be thinking of? On Wednesday nights, what do? We have dinner, right? Yeah? Do we use hard plates on Wednesday nights? We usually do. Okay, great. I was here in the spring, and the night I had dinner here, I saw, okay, well, great, never mind. Good job! Yeah, real silver, real coffee cups, real plates. Excellent. All right, next up. How about this table, ma'am?
We're talking about the
Grocery store is the worst thing,
Yeah.
because you can't get paper bags anymore.
Yeah, it's hard. I do think, I will say, plastic water bottles are a real topic of mine. Unless you live in Flint, Michigan, in America, there's really no need for plastic water bottles. And a group I liked did a study a while ago and tested tap water versus various bottled water sources. I think it was Dasani. It was one of the big ones. They were literally bottling tap water from New York. What? Yeah, it's tap water. And then you pick some clever title that isn't copyright, like Nature's Own Water Source. And it makes you think they're getting it from a stream on the peak of Mount Olympus or whatever, right? But it's not regulated. In most places in America, your tap water is more heavily regulated than the bottled water, right? So we have this idea that bottled water is safer or cleaner in some way. Like, in hurricane disaster areas, you need bottled water, right? If you live in Flint, Michigan, you need bottled water. But most places in America, you don't need bottled water. And I would absolutely encourage everybody to get an Nalgene. They're only like $5, and just carry it with you everywhere.
When I was a kid, if somebody told me that I would eventually pay money for bottled water,
Yeah.
I would just think it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and you can fill up for $1 bottled water. You can fill it up at your faucet and get probably cleaner water for about a penny, right? Probably less. Great. This table, what are we talking about?
We talked about a lot of these things.
Yeah.
One thing we talked about as far as our Wednesday night meals is maybe providing a simpler meal or one that uses less resources, maybe less useless,
Yep.
and more, eating more on the food chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of a cliche.
Yeah.
But eating simpler meals, and I'm sure we throw a lot of food away.
Yep.
But try and maybe, I know it's hard for people to plan how many foods and everything, but
Yep.
making sure that you reduce, trying to get towards zero food waste as much as
Absolutely. And this is a good opportunity to say, when people talk about eating less meat, it's not like, I grew up in cattle country. I get that. It's not because cows are bad or anything like that, although sometimes there's like ethical concern about how we treat animals in these big factories, and that's fair. But if you're going to get a pound of ground beef, you have to use so much corn to produce that pound of ground beef, right? So you have to use the water and resources to make the feed, and then ship it to the cattle, and use the resources to make the cattle meat, and then ship the cattle meat to you. Whereas a plant-based diet, you're only doing one stage of resource intensives and shipping. So that's why eating less meat is more sustainable and uses less resources.
Compare beef to other types of meat.
Yeah, beef is worse. And I like burgers and steaks as much as the next guy. Beef is more resource intensive than chicken, than pigs, especially than fish. Absolutely. And real quick, on the cow farts, which you may have heard about in the press, cows don't even really actually fart. That's kind of a misconception. But cows do produce methane in their digestive process, which is a much worse gas than carbon dioxide for the atmosphere, but there's not as much of it, so you don't hear as much about it. So cattle kind of gets you on both ends, because it takes more resources to eat the meat, and they produce methane. Great. Yes, ma'am?
Is that the same with horses?
Horse meat, that's a great question, and I haven't explored that. It would be worse than plants in the sense that you need more resources to make the meat itself, but I don't know about the digestive process. That's a good question. Okay, who has something we haven't? Yes, sir.
Ride shares and van pools.
Yeah. Because Nashville doesn't have a great public transit, one thing you can do as a church, because this is kind of a downtown church. People drive from all over the place, and a lot of people are driving the same paths within a minute or two of each other. Absolutely. Anything else we haven't put up on the board? We've got a pretty good list here.
When you're not using the lights, turn them off.
Yep, absolutely.
When
Light
I'm
fixture.
at home and it's daylight like this, I leave the lights off. I use the daylight for my light.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess not everybody can do that.
No.
But if you've got enough daylight.
All right. Who here is on the Creation Care Committee? Can you show of hands? We've got a couple people. All right. I would, from where I'm standing, I would say using a compost system would be a really good thing for this church to tackle. Of course, you should tackle all of these, right? Because it's not like I say it's not a silver bullet on climate change, it's silver buckshot, and you need to do a lot of different things. But I think for this church where you're located in a very residential area where there's no compost available within walking distance, if you had a dumpster out back and advertised it, you would, one, get rid of a lot of your personal waste, and two, it'd be a great outreach opportunity for all the local young people who you're trying to attract anyway. That I would say that would be my top recommendation for this church to try and tackle. All right, so if food waste was a country, it'd be, let's see, is it the fourth largest emitter? Right? So it's 40% of all the food we make in this country gets thrown away. Think about that for a second. A third of all the food we make gets thrown away, right? And people are hungry. It's nuts, right? So for one, if you're throwing food away instead of eating it, you're wasting all the resources that went into producing it, right? Excuse me. You're wasting all the resources that produced it. You're wasting all the resources that got it to you, right? And then you're going to go and eat something else later. So for one, you should, if possible, use your food and leftovers and the next day instead of throwing it out. For composting, it keeps your food from going into landfills. And as you may know, Tennessee is about to run out of landfill space in the next 5 or 10 years. And so food waste is a huge chunk of the things we throw away. And when you compost, you can reuse the food instead of putting it in a landfill. So instead of having this be a large chunk of all the stuff you throw away, you can have this be a large chunk of fertile soil in the future. It ties back into a cycle instead of just going into the ground. I'd be glad to follow up after.
You can compost things other than food, too.
Absolutely. You can compost paper plates, you can compost napkins. Most of the big places you can compost meat and bones. You can compost a lot of stuff these days. Okay. Any other question?
Does it help with climate change, the composting?
Absolutely.
How? I was wondering if you can help, I know you don't want to get into a lot of science, but I've been curious, how does recycling and composting help with climate? It obviously helps with waste management,
Yeah.
landfills, and messing up the oceans, but how
Yeah.
does it help with
So using, we'll talk recycling. Glass is a really good example. Using glass that you recycle to make new glass uses significantly less energy than starting from scratch. So you're saving some of the resources you'd have to spend to make this new resource by using some of the old resource. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I want to just say a contrarian thing, because that's
Okay.
my nature, and it doesn't mean that I really believe this is what I'm about to say, but
Okay.
everything, not everything, but there's some unintended consequences of removing all these various steps in the transportation chain, which is loss of jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk about job guarantees and things like the Green New Deal in just a minute. I want to wrap up because we're at time. Thank you all. I've really enjoyed being here this summer. I've enjoyed getting to know the church a little bit and getting to know you all a little bit. I would love for you to stay in contact. I have my website is MatthewDgroves.com. You can follow me on Twitter. Come on. There we go. Follow me on Twitter. Send me an email. There's a contact form. I brought a bunch of books, my favorite books on climate change and on science and faith. I have an email listserv where I send out science and faith tidbits. If you want to be included, by all means, put your name and email down. And if you know people who are in other churches around town who might be interested in hearing some of these things, I have cards. Send them my way. I'm pretty open in the fall so far for my Sunday school class schedule. And I would be glad to find other churches in the area. Any last questions? I'll stay up here for a little while if anybody wants to chat. But thank you all so much for this summer.